Hello there. These are, well, these are what are known as Asano Nagura. If you want to know exactly what that means, the best thing I can tell you is look at Keith V. Johnson's videos on them. But basically, what it means is these are, uh, they come from a particular place. They are graded to a particular standard, and the stamps placed on them signify that. That's it. uh, Whether or not some people believe a silent Nagura are the only Nagurs worth messing with and all. You know what? I don't really know anything about that, and I don't really get into it. They're rocks, so you know all rocks are different, and just because it comes from and bears a particular stamp doesn't necessarily mean that something that doesn't is inferior. So we're not. That's not. I'm just saying that's what these are. This is a Tenju Majiro. Now, and that is the stampings on them. Here, Majiro, and here, Tenju. Uh, say what they are. And typically, what you would do is, from my understanding, you'd come off a bevel setter stone and you go to a stone, a Nagura that would be known as a Botan. And it's supposedly the coarsest of them, and then you would move to that to the Majiro, to the Tenju, then the Majiro, then I think there's a stone that is so hard to get you hardly ever see it. It's called a Koma, and then Tomo. But most people vary on which stones they use. This is the progression I use. Uh, while these are Asano stamped, this is not. This was given to me by a very good friend, and it is just a chunk of JNAT that's probably similar or maybe a little less or a little more harder than the Shobu, which is underneath it. And I use it, it's used as a Tomo, or the last stone in my progression. Tomo usually means, from what I understand, means same. So the same or similar to your base stone. And it would be, this is what I use in the final progression, as sometimes I will go from this to plain water. And sometimes I will go from this to a DMT slurry, a very light DMT slurry on this, hoping to kick up more of the base stone than what this would kick up. Just depends. Why am I telling you this? I'm kind of trying to let people who maybe don't have a lot of knowledge have a little bit of the tiny bit of knowledge, that I have on it. I have sufficient knowledge to hone with it, and that's about it. So now these stones have been setting out. So there might be dust on the surface of this stone. I can't feel anything. It's wonderfully smooth as glass. But what I'm going to do, and this is just uh, a stand or holder that one of my water stones came with, but it's rubber and it grabs a bit, and I use it to elevate this stone. But I'm going to go over here and I'm going to run some water on this stone now. These two stones have been, face down like this on top of this stone, so they should be clean. The Tomo, on the other hand, has been sitting straight up, so I'm going to rinse that. And it's just being a kind of fastidious with things. And this is my Germania Cutlery Works, the Oxford razor. This camera, the detail isn't all that great, but it's bird's eye maple scales. It's a beautiful razor, but I want to kind of refine the edge, and I've found that a lot of times if you take a really nice edge to start with and go to this Shobu and go through the progression, what you end up with is a really, really much nicer edge. So I'm going to raise a little slurry on this. But you end up with what ends up being a really, really much nicer and I don't know if you can see, but there's little grains there. I think this kicked up a bit of sand. Sometimes they will, because that's basically what they are. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to rinse this stone a bit, and we're going to go in for a second shot. Because I don't want, and there we go, it's coming fine now. I don't want any strange particles in the slurry that I'm using. Ruining my edge. So and more often than not, I use a simple X stroke. And usually, I know a lot of guys come from a 1K to something like the Shobudani. I will do that if I'm just using the Tomo, and then I'll raise a heavy slurry and come through thinning that slurry out a bit, almost like a Delicate on a caudicle. But when I use these Asano Nagura, or when I use Nagura, whatever Nagura it is, I usually like to come off of a 3K stone. You'll see this in Keith Johnson's videos as well. Sometimes I have heard him say he's come off something like a 5K. So I just think you get a much better edge if you do some of the mid-range, the low-end to mid-range work before you come to something like this. It's not necessary. I can take a 1200 mesh DMT card and kick up a base slurry on this stone and go for 1K all the way to finish and get a scalding edge off of it. And that's fun sometimes too. But this right here, I am using just a slight bit of pressure or torque toward the edge. Not a lot, but more than I would use at a higher grit. When I get to the really high grits, I would use pretty much weight of razor only. But I want this slurry to kind of refine this edge. And the slurry's getting a little, in my opinion, a little thick. So I'll hit it with a little water, but I just want to keep it wet. I'm not trying to thin it out. What I'm going to do is work this slurry. I'm not counting anything, any such thing like that. But I'm going to work this slurry until I see a color change in the slurry and until it feels like the slurry is not doing anything to the edge. A lot of guys rely on stiction or suction, but I'm using tape on the spine because that's my preference. Now what I do, you'll see me use this finger sometimes. I don't use it always because the arthritis and nerve damage in my arms, shoulders, hands, and stuff like that sometimes can flare up, particularly in that right arm. That's why you saw me start out with it and then go to a single hand, and I'll be going back to that single hand in a bit because I have physical limitations on what I can do. But I am not putting pressure on it. I'm just using it as a balance point so that I know that the whole edge is contacting the stone. And you can see, if you look at that, I don't know if you can tell the difference or not, but that went from a fairly white creamy kind of color to mostly a gray, almost a grayish brown. Okay, in my opinion, I'm done with that slurry. What I'm going to do is raise another slurry with the Tenju, but it's going to be lighter. See the difference? I don't know if you can see the difference in the slurry or not, but obviously I can. And all I'm going to do now is on this until, once again, either the slurry changes of color or it feels like it's not doing anything to the edge, or both. And that's a little dry, so we're going to add a tad of moisture because I don't want my edge going back. I want it to stay, keep going forward. And if you notice, you'll see me do this a lot. I tend to hone, even on this is a fairly straight blade. The spine curves just a little bit, but this is a fairly straight blade. I need to adjust the exposure just a tad. There. So you can see the stone better. But anyway, I don't remember what I was saying. Oh, you'll see a lot of times I'll do this number here. Even with kind of a straight blade, I'm honing toward a smile. You know, I saw one guy mention on one of the forums or Facebook pages. Well, they're called straight razors for a reason. Well, it isn't because the edge is straight, fellas. Sorry. There's plenty of curved straight razors. They don't call them curved razors. They call them straight razors too, okay? And if you look at the old barber handbooks, that honing towards a smile is something they advocate quite a lot. It just makes sense. It helps to avoid a frown in the blade. It also helps to catch the heel and the toe when you're hung. Now, you don't always have to do that. You can, that heel forward works fine too. But you'll see me, and you'll see me do both, but you'll see me do this a lot because, quite frankly, I believe there's benefit to it. And the slurry feels like it's not really adding anything to the party anymore. So we're going to come off a Tenju. And I'm just taking and wiping that slowly off the hand with my hand. We're going to move to the Nagura. And it's the same process over again. And I believe in a heavy slurry. Now, I don't mean, sometimes you'll hear me call it thick, and I'm not talking about thick as in not having water in it. I mean a substantial slurry. Uh, I don't believe tiny little thin slurries until you start getting toward the really close refinement of it make a lot of difference. Now you see the difference in the color of that. See the creaminess of that slurry. It's different stones. Beautiful stuff. One of the most fascinating and fun things about JNATs and Nagura and all of that. But I believe that you need some flipping slurry on the stone in order to actually get some work done. And you can see the slurry's not quite as bright and creamy. It's changed color. But it still feels to me like it's cutting a bit. So I'm going to let it go just a bit. Now this is just my way. Some other guy, he might have a different way of doing it. That's a beautiful edge already. But for me, this is the technique I use. light, lighter slurry now. And you can see that, see how it rolls over the edge? Tells me that I've got a really nice bevel on it, and the razor's conforming to the stone really well, and I'm getting good solid contact with the stone and with the slurry all the way across the hone. And I'm lightening up on pressure now. And I can feel, even though I'm using tape, I can feel a bit of resistance as I pull across that stone, and that's telling me, along with the feedback I'm getting from the slurry, that's telling me this is pretty much done. Alright. Now, the tomo. And from here on in, it'll be light weight of the razor strokes. This slurry tends to dry up very fast compared to the other Nagura, or the Nagura. And now what I'm going to do is I'll begin to thin this. Like I said, this is just my way. All different kinds. But I'll thin this until it gets kind of a misty, watery, really, really thin, almost not there kind of slurry. And actually, I can feel that slurry right there is pretty much done. So now, what I could do with this is I could either thin this out till I had basically almost no water whatsoever. You see that? Or no slurry whatsoever. Or I could go to plain water, which I believe I'll do. Alright, now, that last slurry that I did before I wiped this stone, I could have finished on that just fine and been okay. It's dropped up and I'd have been okay. It's just all in how far you want to go. To me, the water tends to give a bit keener edge, but if you notice, I didn't rinse this stone under a tap. There's still very minute traces of a slurry left on this stone, even with clear water the way that it's almost like if you know anything about cauticles, some guys will say, well, there are cauticles, and it's true, that auto slurry. In other words, as you hone on them, they'll kick up a bit of slurry. That's similar to what I'm doing by not rinsing the stone and just using them. There's a tiny little microscopic bit of um, slurry that I think has a positive influence on the edge, but you're going to also understand and come to realize as you hone more that some of this is kind of a science, some of it is an art, and some is just plain superstition. Whatever the guy believes works. If he believes it and it works for him, then that's So there you go. That's it. So all right, that's the edge. I don't even need to test this. I know it's going to be gorgeous, uh, hair popping, beautiful. So all right, God bless you. Thanks for coming along. I'll talk to you later.